What's up everyone, it's Endymion, and I honestly thought the Cleopatra nonsense was over and done with. The show is the lowest rated series in the history of television and everyone hates it. And it seems like sane, rational thinking individuals have finally won in the massive culture war. But as always, whenever something that revises history and pushes an agenda fails, the apologists start to emerge from the shadows. So today, there's been some funny developments surrounding Netflix's disaster, so let's get into it. Starting off, we have the website Decider, where one of its journalists decided it was a good idea to double down on attacking the audience for Cleopatra's failure. The article is titled, "Queen Cleopatra's audience score getting review bombed on Rotten Tomatoes isn't funny, it's racist." As you can imagine, this article went about as well as you'd expect it would, with it saying, and I quote, "In today's game of Is It Racist, we're looking at the Rotten Tomato reviews for Netflix's Queen Cleopatra. The new docuseries has accumulated thousands of negative reviews from viewers and critics who are mad that the Egyptian queen was portrayed by a black actor, Adele James." You may be wondering, how do we know that's what they're upset over? Well, racists aren't as smart as you may think, and no matter how much they dress up their words, the quiet part is always made loud. Many of the reviews distinctly criticize the casting choice for Cleopatra or slam its historical inaccuracy, telling us exactly why they hated the series. Entertainment outlet Boy Genius Report called the Queen Cleopatra reviews hilarious, and Game Rant claimed that it is not a good show regardless of the casting controversy, citing the low score from critics. But here's the thing, after scrolling through some of the critic reviews, they also seem to be upset that Cleopatra was portrayed by a mixed-race actor. The audience reviews aren't much different. Depicting Cleopatra as a sub-Saharan African in a documentary is historically inaccurate and can be seen as an insult to both Greek and Egyptian history, wrote a one-star reviewer. Other armchair historians claim the series is a fictional drama, historically inaccurate, and the worst drivel in the historic facts and comparable to a haphazard mess. Discrediting the array of historians Netflix interviewed for the series, which ranged from professors to Egyptologists. Several comments went as far as criticizing James' looks, writing that she is the ugliest cast actress playing the Greek-Egyptian queen Cleopatra, who was in reality brilliant, talented, and spoke 9 languages, and everyone got attracted to her charming beauty. Needless to say, the docu-series was horrifically review-bombed in a manner that is extremely unfunny and quite dangerous to the creatives involved in the production and the future of black representation in entertainment. So, with the overwhelming amount of evidence presented, it's fair to say that yes, the Queen Cleopatra review bombing is indeed racist, regardless of what you thought about the documentary itself." End quote. As I have been saying for almost a year now, when faced with valid criticism, it is never a good idea to attack your audience regardless of position. The people watching your content is the reason why you get to do it for a living in the first place. Attacking them is the last thing you should ever be doing. I also found it funny how very early on in this article, the journal admits that many of the reviews distinctly criticize the casting choice for Cleopatra or slam its historical inaccuracy, telling us exactly why they hated the series. I don't know if this Decider journalist understands what a self-own is, but ladies and gentlemen, this is a great example of that. Decider unraveled their own argument within the first few paragraphs of their own article. Yes, nobody wants to see historical, inaccurate portrayals of real-life figures and then have it be appropriated by another culture. That's not being racist, that's being level-headed and sane in a world that forgot what common sense means. It's also funny when Decider calls the people who review bomb Cleo as armchair historians, as if the people who worked on the show are any more qualified since they were willing to stake their professional status on such an abomination to begin with. As for claiming that the failure of Cleopatra will set black entertainment back as a medium is also tone-deaf to say as well, because you can't use something that wasn't black affiliated to begin with to stall a movement of a people who have no connection with the source material anyway. I don't think Cleopatra will ruin black entertainment in the future, but it'll likely make audiences hyper-aware to the unjust revisionism that's going on in Hollywood today. Which is actually a good thing, but then again, I guess I'm one of these armchair historian racists apparently. Also, I disagree with anyone who said Adele James is ugly in any review, because she's far from being ugly and is quite pleasant on the eyes. Besides that, yeah, the rest of the show is a no-no for me. Anyway, I thought that was it. There wouldn't be enough here to warrant a video, but it turns out this same journalist who wrote this article actually wrote another one recently, and well, let's read it together. Raven Brunner's work for Decider clearly has an ideology bias, with her obviously being very left-leaning.
What do you mean, you people?
What do you mean, you people?
Huh?
But we're here to focus on this next article she wrote a few days back, titled, "Why Did Cleopatra Delete Herself? Netflix's Queen Cleopatra paints Egyptian's queen's death as powerful. She is in control." For obvious reasons, I can't say a certain word on YouTube because of self-harm policies, so instead of the S word, I'll say delete. Anyway, moving on. The article basically tries to paint Cleopatra's self-deletion as being heroic and selfless of her, with Raven Brunner even going as far as to say that Cleo deleting herself showed she was always in control of the situation. Now, I don't know about you, but I think if any situation leads to you having to delete yourself, you're probably the opposite of whatever control is. But what do I know? Again, I'm just a racist armchair historian apparently. Raven Brunner says in her article, and I quote, "In these years, deletion was considered the bravest thing to do according to a Roman person, as Jacqueline Williamson, associate producer of Art and Archaeology of the Mediterranean, expresses in the documentary. She says it is a way for leaders to maintain dignity even in the face of death, which is why it is believed that Cleopatra, following Antony's death, had committed deletion rather than be murdered by Octavian, who did not want her to die in the hands of the Romans out of fear of rebellion from her followers. Though some suspect Cleopatra was driven to self-deletion by Antony, who was keeping her as a prisoner. In the Netflix series, Haley states that Cleopatra researched different options for self-deletion to ensure that it wouldn't be painful nor would it distort her body. She decides how she's going to die, and he decides with whom she's going to die. It's not Octavian, it's not the Roman Senate, it's Cleopatra. She is in control. But the Egyptian queen didn't ditch her country. In fact, she deleted herself as a result of the civil war in Rome, which she was fighting on behalf of her people. The war had previously led to the assassination of Cleopatra's late husband, Roman dictator Julius Caesar. His successor Antony, who was also her lover, died as well. So the answer to how Queen Cleopatra died is a resounding "we don't know for sure." What we do know though is that she was the one who chose the way she went out, end quote. And yet again, these journos and revisionist weirdos have such a fascination with changing what things mean in order for it to fit their agenda. Saying Cleopatra's death was by her own hands and then claiming it as some yes girl boss moment is so bizarre to me. She deleted because the kingdom had been overthrown. She was a foreigner ruling over a land she did not originate from. So of course, once the rebellion had breached the kingdom, Cleo clearly didn't want to get put into the hands of her enemies, because the likelihood of what would have happened to her had her enemies gotten a hold of her would have been, well, yeah. I don't really want to explore what it would be like in that situation, but it seemed that self-deletion was the only escape. I don't really think glorifying an act like that, however, should be celebrated or praised though. But I may just be biased when it comes to that topic in general, but I find it extremely sad and worrying if anyone romanticizes the concept of deletion. Raven Brunner has already dug a pretty big enough hole when it comes to her defending of Netflix's series. But she continues with another article titled, "Netflix's Queen Cleopatra gives 0 Fs about portraying Cleopatra as black in docu-series." Raven continues her descent into moronic virtue signaling by saying, quote, "But as the critics grow louder, does their argument hold merit? According to the documentary itself, no. To many, it is obvious what this criticism is, an unashamed display of anti-blackness and nationalistic behavior, seen in both the petition denouncing the Afrocentrism movement, which at its core serves to center black voices and subjects in scholarly research, and the ministry's main defense being sculptures that have been examined by researchers who intrinsically have a different relationship with race than the artists did in the Renaissance era. In the documentary, Heard compares Cleopatra to a chameleon and says that she looks different depending on who is depicting her. Dr. Issa agrees, stating that the appeal of Cleopatra is that we can imagine her in whatever way we choose. But what Issa fails to acknowledge, at no fault of his own, is that we seemingly as a society are allowed to do so in any way, as long as it isn't the way the documentary itself depicts her as, a black woman, end quote. It's incredible to me the lengths people will go to twist the words and ideals of something in order to get it to fit the agenda. Claiming Cleopatra is now not only the last pharaoh, but she's a chameleon. These sorts of things are only said in order to bolster the revisionist mental gymnastics of people like Raven Brunner or Jada Pinkett Smith. What worries me is that journalists and producers like these two will repeat ad nauseum until they are accepted as true actual facts. It doesn't matter how much they get repeated, as long as they eventually transform the true meaning, then it's mission accomplished. Other websites like theconversation.com actually got a little based and decided to plug some sanity into the controversy, which was actually nice to see. They also pointed out that one of the so-called Egypt experts Netflix hired was Colleen Darnell, who is shown here cosplaying as a vintage Egyptologist. Why this is just tone-deaf beyond belief is that the outfit is influenced by the 1920s fashion, which was a time period where Britain was known for violence and colonization of places like Egypt. And during this time period, people dressed like this were responsible for robbing Egypt of its artifacts and then bringing them to European countries. So having a woman who romanticizes the worst parts of white colonialism dressed as someone from that era being picked by Netflix in order to properly portray the Egyptian queen accurately, yeah, it's not a good look. The Conversation ends its article by saying Netflix is in the wrong for its very clear push for cultural appropriation, and that the controversy surrounding this is a genuine reaction to people being tired of history being colonized by oppressors. What we're seeing here ultimately is what always happens when these woke ideas fail. The very people who latch onto these ideologies like bugs on crap will start up the usual talking points about how the world isn't ready for something like this, or the public is wrong and closed-minded. Basically, they are revising their positions and morality about something they revised and culturally appropriated, in order to seem morally superior to the people that got appropriated and refused to sit down and take it. This has crescendoed into one of the largest media pushback campaigns in years. The only thing I could say was met with such a passionate pushback from the audience was maybe The Last Jedi. But this is obviously real history, sorry Star Wars fans, but Baby Grogu isn't real, and neither is Babu Freak. And if Babu Freak was real, I'd hurl that little guy into traffic like a baseball if I could. But it should be said that it's very interesting how people like Raven Brunner attacks the audience for their low score, but doesn't attack the critics who do the same thing. It's as if these journals believe only they should have the right to judge things and normal people should just consume and shut up. This is obviously stupid, and I'm glad we're calling this stuff out for what it is. But anyway, as of right now, I think you're just about caught up when it comes to everything Cleopatra, Netflix, and all that nonsense now. Thank you for watching, subscribe for more nonsense like this, like the video to help the channel out, and I'll see you in the next one.